The U.S. has agreed to rapidly boost shipments of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to the European Union this year as part of efforts to wean the bloc off Russian fuel. The announcement came during President Joe Biden's visit to Brussels. The U.S. will offer an additional 15 billion cubic meters of LNG in 2022. Last year, they shipped 22 billion cubic meters to the EU. The bloc hopes to replace two-thirds of Russian gas imports by year-end. Germany Friday said its plans to ditch Russian energy are progressing. It expects to import only 30% of its gas from Russia this year, compared to almost twice that before the war. Now, to do that, the EU will need more natural gas, not just from the U.S., but also from suppliers in the Gulf region, such as Qatar. It's a country with enormous gas reserves, but a controversial record on human rights.
Qatar is a top producer of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, seen as critical for Germany weaning itself off Russian imports. But the Gulf country is also well known for its stained human rights record. Rights groups criticize the exploitation of Qatar's 2 million migrant workers. The deaths of thousands of workers over the past decade have gone ignored by authorities. Modest labor reforms have reportedly stalled. Other reports point to restricted freedom of expression and the repression of women. As Germany frantically searches for new trade partners, should the country put human rights at the forefront of its trade relations?
Against the background of German history, it's a very important topic. Everybody should think about this when buying products. Our constitution says human dignity is inviolable. That also counts for other countries from which we purchase products.
Definitely. I think especially with globalization, which is increasing, we can't avoid the topic.
Yeah, I think it's important, but it's difficult. We can see that with Habeck's visit to the UAE and the Gulf states. It's like choosing between the lesser of two evils.
For Berlin, finding reliable energy from reliable partners is now a problem with no easy solution. So far, pragmatism prevails.
Now, Germany may be taking a pragmatic approach, as we heard there, but it's also indicated it wants more cooperation with like-minded countries. After Russia invaded Ukraine, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner said that Germany, especially now in the Ukraine crisis, it is becoming clear how important free trade is with partners around the world who share our values. He was proposing there a wider trade deal with the U.S. But only transacting with countries that share your values drastically reduces your options. A new survey suggests that for the first time since 2004, there are more countries that are labeled as autocracies than democracies. Among the autocratic countries are some of Germany's main trading partners. That means China, Turkey, Russia, and Saudi Arabia are among them. And replacing Russia means turning to places like Qatar. So it's clear some compromises will have to be made when it comes to human rights and trade. Now, for more, let's bring in Maria Demertis, the Deputy Director of the Bruegel think tank. So, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. So the EU, on the one hand, wants to cut Russia out of the energy supply. On the other hand, it is striking these deals with countries like Qatar that have questionable human rights past histories there. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?
Well, yeah, it just points to an incredible dilemma. We have had 20 or 30 years of globalization where the motto with which we were operating was, expand, reduce cost, increase the trade links, promote growth for all countries in the world. And now we realize, of course, that was not the best of strategies. How do you roll this back? This is the dilemma, and at the same time preserve the level of welfare that we have in Europe. This is an incredibly difficult dilemma, but we have to confront it because, as we saw, the path that we traveled in the past 30 years is also not sustainable. It amounts to types of issues that could lead to war like the one we're witnessing now.
So just taking a broader look at this war and the outcome it has had, countries are obviously being put in a position to pick a side. What sort of effect is that having on global trade relationships in general?
Well, as you say, we are creating camps, camps that are not really new. They had been there for a long time, and it is very much a division of ideology in some ways, a division in the way that we like to do business, and the Western model and an Eastern model. And the camps have already been created. But the fact is, what is the end game here? Can we continue to talk between the two camps, or is it de facto an isolation of a bipolar world in which you have two competing systems that only talk to each other, not the rest? I find this a very, very bad outcome, not only because trade relations would suffer, our welfare will suffer, but also because the biggest challenge here, namely climate and energy, it requires the whole world. You cannot solve climate with just talking to what we call now the like-minded countries. We need to talk to everybody. We need to engage with everybody, and that means that the polarization of the world is very bad news for climate.
So you mentioned it there. We do seem to be seeing, a West versus East situation. What does that mean for the global economy if we do see, the U.S. and EU coming closer together as the Western bloc, and then, Russia and China sort of forming this anti-Western bloc?
De facto, that means less interaction between the two blocks, to the extent that I can define them this way. The interlinkages that we have today between the two blocks are enormous, and it's very difficult to decouple. And if we were to decouple, it would imply huge welfare losses for both sides. The cost will go up for just about everything. The supply chains will be shortened, and therefore that is very bad news for everybody. The question is, can we maintain it?
That is Maria de Mertz's Deputy Director of the Bruegel think tank. So much for joining us. Now, Switzerland has joined the EU in imposing harsh sanctions on Russia, but it is yet to restrict Russian commodity trades. The vast majority of those deals are done in Switzerland, bringing in even more money for the country than tourism.
Even in neutral Switzerland, there are regular demonstrations against the war, like here in Geneva at the headquarters of the United Nations. The focus is on the oil and gas trade, which is still taking place and filling Putin's war chest. Up to 80% of Russia's raw materials are traded in Switzerland. Companies such as Gunvor, Mercury, Rosneft, Glencore, and many others are Swiss-based and continue doing business largely unchecked. Commodity trading really needs to be regulated. There needs to be transparency when it comes to commodity traders' payments to governments, especially to autocratic regimes, which then divert these funds into their own pockets. They pocket the funds, or in the worst case, they finance wars with them. There's not much happening these days at this inconspicuous address. It's the Swiss branch office of Nord Stream 2. After German and U.S. sanctions were imposed on the pipeline project, there were more than 100 layoffs at the firm.
De kanton Zug war involviert.
The canton of Zug was involved in the termination process,
Und wir haben dort Informationen
and we received information that the Nord Stream 2 accounts have been blocked.
gesperrt sind. Und das hat für uns im Rahmen
And for us, that meant there's a de facto insolvency in the context of these terminations.
de facto Insolvenz.
Even though the Swiss government has now fully complied with the EU sanctions, raw material trade via the Alpine Republic has continued. Russian gas is being ordered, delivered, and paid for. New cash for Putin's war chest. Only a complete energy embargo against Russia would help. In this situation, we believe that an embargo on Russian oil and gas must be discussed internationally and supported by Switzerland. We could make an embargo against Russia if we don't order anything, but we have to be prepared, especially when it comes to gas. We have to obtain the scarce capacities of other countries. We have to be prepared to demand less and relatively quickly. The energy embargo against Russia that these demonstrators are seeking is possible. It would mean in future that Switzerland has more control over its commodity trade and could avoid indirectly financing wars.
Well, now my colleague Stephen Beardsley joins me in the studio to answer some of your YouTube questions. Stephen, thanks for being here. So we'll start with Dr. T, who asks, Western sanctions seem like someone is holding your savings and doesn't want to pay you back. How is that even legal?
Yeah, I'm assuming he's referring to the decision by many Western nations to not honor the foreign reserves Russia has in their holding. And you know, this has happened before. The Taliban, for example, their foreign reserves are being held as well, and they're not being allowed to be liquefied. But for an economy of this size, it is sort of breathtaking, and it's unprecedented in a lot of ways. The question is, for the legality, is there a court who really can adjudicate this? No. You could say, why did you give your foreign reserves to another country to hold? Of course, that's the idea, is you hold dollars, you hold euros, you hold other currencies besides your own. That helps you to prop up your own currency as well at home. It is unprecedented, and you know, there have been some criticisms, modest, you would say, but more those are asking the question: what does this really mean? Are reserves now not money? Because reserves are money, and if you then say that they cannot be liquidated, then you throw them into question, and that could speed up this move away from globalization. If nations start to believe that they can't trust other currencies, then what are they going to do? If they can't trust the SWIFT transaction messaging system, then they're going to find alternatives. If they can't trust if businesses can't trust being a certain country, then they may reduce their footprint in supply chains. What we're seeing potentially with this is more pressure to move away from diversifying into other countries' regions, whether it's your businesses, whether it's your reserve currencies, things like that. So that is one of the things that makes this so impressive when you look at it, and does make you scratch your head sometimes.
Definitely an existential question about what is money.
For sure.
Okay, so next we have Higher Spirit, and he or she is asking, am I missing something here? Isn't Russia still providing oil for the European Union and the UK? Why is the focus on China in media and not with others?
Okay, well, this seems to be maybe in one sense a criticism on our last show, in which we did focus a bit more on China. Of course, that was the theme then. We have focused plenty on the EU's connection with Russia when it comes to fuel, as we have today with this program. But there is a connection between the two. If Europe is not going to pull as much fuel from Russia, then of course maybe China can step in and take up some of that capacity. And that goes in general for Western businesses and the marketplace in Russia. If Europe is going to leave it wholesale, Europe and the US, Japan, South Korea, all these nations who have announced sanctions, then there is room for someone else to come in. It could be to China's benefit. So, you know, one leaves, another comes in, and that could actually not necessarily be to Russia's benefit as well, because it gives more leverage to China, for example, if they want better terms for gas or oil. So it is all interconnected. And we do really pay attention to here a lot of the hand-wringing around this question of, you know, how Europe tethered itself so strongly to Russian energy. And that's something that's taken place over years, over decades. And you see this a lot here in Germany. You see it elsewhere in Europe, that's sort of grappling with this question: was this wise? You know, what should have been done instead? And what is the way moving forward? And I think that's what we're going to continue to focus on in the future as well, including talking about LNG, for example. That's just one path, but not the whole answer.
Okay, and this is a question that I had never thought about, but is actually a very good question. CR or Kerr, we were debating the pronunciation earlier, but
right.
When Western companies are pulling out of Russia, are they leaving all their property behind?
Well, I think the trick here is, are they pulling out of the country? I would say most of them to this point have said that they are suspending operations. So they're not, you know, putting factories, you know, disassembling factories and putting cars and ships and things like that on trains and hauling them out. Right now, this is an evolving situation. Volkswagen, for example, you know, when we talked to them, they said, well, we're going to keep paying our employees there for 3 months. We said, well, okay, what after that? And they said, we don't know what's going to happen with this in the next month, so how can we say? So this is definitely a developing situation, and I would imagine that most businesses, including those who have been there for decades, they obviously want to go back, and they imagine still serving a Russian clientele. They have businesses there, they have connections, so they're not necessarily exiting things out of the country. There is this question of whether Russia might try and nationalize or expropriate some of their property. They've been making signals about this, making noises about it, but that's not as easy as it sounds or they make it out to be. There's legal risks there. There's also the fact that many of these businesses that are in Russia are actually importing their goods, especially when it comes to consumer goods. So it's a lot easier said, but it's going to be difficult to put that in practice.
Stephen Beardsley, thank you so much for joining me and answering the questions.